A local judge has been taking a lot of heat, with some legislators now calling for him to be removed from the bench. Salem Superior Court Judge Timothy Feely sentenced Manuel Soto Vittini, an admitted heroin dealer who is not a U.S. citizen, to 2 years probation, noting at one point that he would have sent Soto Vittini to prison if he were a citizen, sparking outrage among many who argue Feely was too lenient.
I'm incensed to think that a judge would condone a heroin dealer being freed so that he can continue to deal his poison.
Go home, retire, get out. You're not serving your purpose.
Court transcripts also show Feely weighed the defense's claim that Soto Vittini was trying to make money for his family, a point that stuck with Governor Charlie Baker.
In this particular case, this criminal did not have an addiction. He was simply dealing death to make money. And I think for Judge Feely to blow that off and to let him go was a terrible decision.
A group of lawmakers has since filed a resolution starting the process to have Feely removed from the bench. Should he be? And should it be our legislators who get to decide? I'm joined by State Representative Shawna O'Connell. She's a Republican from Taunton who co-sponsored that resolution. Representative, it's good to see you. Robert Cordy, a former Mass Supreme Judicial Court Justice, started out as a public defender, now a partner at McDermott, Will & Emery Justice. It's good to see you. Thanks so much for being here. So what specifically in the judge's decision convinced you and some of your colleagues that it merits Judge Feely's removal?
Well, my colleagues and myself, led by Representative Jim Lyons of Andover, who came up with this idea to file the petition and who did file it. Look, the judge's decision was just completely reckless. And as you well pointed out, for him to just consider that this was someone who was just making money for his family, was not hurting anyone, and to let him back out on the streets when he was dealing poison.
He didn't say it wasn't hurting anyone. He did say the first time. He also went on to say he's a first-time offender. Is that not relevant in a decision like this?
He might be. This is maybe the first time he had a conviction.
Correct.
He is well known to police, and that is documented in articles.
But it is
he is a well-known
conviction.
drug dealer. The fact is, he is a well-known drug dealer. He had 40 bags of heroin, and this judge let him back out onto the street because he did not want him deported. The judge was really pushing his own personal agenda and not thinking about the safety of the public and that community and the people that he's dealing these drugs to that are eventually going to overdose and die, like you heard those mothers say.
Justice Cordy, are you comfortable with the decision?
With Judge Feely's decision?
Yes.
I think I might have done something different if I had been there and known all of the facts. But judges have discretion. The legislature sets a range of punishment for offenses, and judges take lots of things into consideration. What I am most concerned about is the threat of impeachment really undermining the independent judiciary.
You compared it to the Salem witch trials. That's a bit much, isn't it?
Well, it's the...
I guess the answer is yes.
I was trying to make a point.
Okay, you've made a
point.
That
in 240 years, we haven't removed a judge for making a decision that was within his discretion.
But you could, I mean, as someone who I think is sensitive to how the public feels, can you understand how members of the public and elected officials say, we have no recourse. There's no accountability here. For those who believe in judicial independence, we have lifetime tenure in Massachusetts. You can serve until
70.
Till 70. You left a couple of years earlier, but till 70. What should someone do who feels horribly aggrieved, whether they're an elected representative or just an average person?
Well, I think very strongly that the judiciary should be open to criticism. That's fair, even harsh criticism. But the independent judiciary was invented in Massachusetts, and the federal government took it up. There are accountability mechanisms within the judiciary. There is an appeal. Appeals are the way in which the appellate courts ensure that judges are complying with the law as interpreted. There's a judicial code of conduct, very important. There is transparency, which, of course, is what's caused some of this uproar.
Except there are rules that say judges can't further explain their decisions, which I have never understood to begin with. So there's limited transparency, no?
Well, no. Judges should explain their decisions.
I mean, beyond what they say. If they say something and there's some questioning by people by the representative, aren't they precluded from commenting further?
They shouldn't be reacting to press and public comments. after they've made the decision. What they should do is either in writing or orally explain why they have reached the decision.
Now, before you comment on why you think impeachment is the appropriate vehicle rather than appeal or whatever Justice Cordy said, it's not, it may be unprecedented in our state. It's not unprecedented elsewhere. I'm sure most of you know that on Tuesday in California, a judge was recalled, actually. He was the judge who sentenced that Stanford swimmer to a very mild sentence after raping a woman who was unconscious at the time. Here's one of the leaders of the recall effort.
This election will have no impact on judicial independence. Judge Persky is an elected official, and there is no such thing as an elected official who is independent of the voters.
Many people think it will have an impact on independent. Why is impeachment the right remedy? Even if you're as upset as I'm sure you say you are, why isn't one of the remedies Justice Cordy mentioned, or a whole spectrum of other things, including just shining a light on this thing, why isn't that appropriate? Why impeachment?
We've shown a light on many of these cases before, and things don't change. Appeal doesn't change the fact that this judge is going to continue to be on the bench and continue to let criminals that are dangerous out into our community.
But if you're right and the higher court says that you were wrong, you were not within the bounds of your authority, as Justice Cordy said, you don't think that judge will be chastened and rethink sentencing going forward?
I haven't seen that happen, Jim. I mean, look what happened to Officer Gannon, who was killed by a violent repeat offender that shouldn't have been out in the community. Another person that Feely let go on a low bail went and killed an officer in Maine. And, you know, judicial independence is one thing. Judicial irresponsibility is another. And that's what we're seeing here.
But speaking about irresponsible, I played a comment from the governor before, and I mean this respectfully towards Governor Baker. In one of his comments we didn't play, he groups the behavior of Feely that he and you think is troubling with Judge Estes in Western Mass, who was just censured by the SJC and then resigned, who had sex with a drug clinician in his chamber. To compare a guy whose decision you don't like within the bounds of law with a guy who obviously engaged in gross misconduct, is that being fair with the public?
Well, I think, you know, Estes, that's personal conduct, so that is a different case. What we're talking about is...
in his chambers.
Right, and that's wrong. But we're talking about a judge who is pushing his own agenda and disregarding the safety of the public. And we have the ability, it's written in our Constitution, to file this resolution and to send it to the governor and to have the governor's council remove Judge Feely.
There's no question you have the power to do this.
We do have a governor's council that has spoken out in favor of this as well, and it's a bipartisan effort. And
I want to talk about accountability, though, beyond what you said a minute ago. There is a mandatory retirement, but there was another justice sitting here a couple of years ago, Justice Breyer from the Supreme Court, and I asked him about term limits. I want your thoughts on what he had to say. Here he is.
I would say there should be a long tenure. Whether it's a term of years or not, maybe it would be better to have a term of years, but it must be long, because you don't want a person in that job thinking about his next job.
Okay, term limits is one possibility. Review. Governor Romney at one point proposed, I don't know if it ever formally became put to paper, that there be some retention review every X number of years. So there's a balance between your concern about judicial independence and your concern about accountability. Any of those things work, or is your attitude that they stay there until they're forced to leave at 70?
Well, it's very interesting. In 1853, at the Constitutional Convention of Massachusetts, there was a move to...
You were there.
I was.
As I remember well.
It was great. There was a movement to make judges, to amend the Massachusetts Constitution to make judges elected. In part, it was because people were upset that Massachusetts judges were enforcing the federal fugitive slave law, which, of course, they are required to do. And Rufus Choate, one of the great orators and public officials of his time, got up and said, no, this is... You do not want to do this. The qualities that you look for in an elected official are so different than the qualities you look for in a judge. And that's not the way to select judges.
Is it, by the way? But that's an interesting question. I mean, I haven't brought that up, but there are 38 states that allow election of judges to courts like the one that he sat on. Is that the solution here, electing judges at all levels so that the people have the say?
I don't have a problem with electing judges. There has to be some type of accountability. There is not in Massachusetts. You know, there is a soft on crime kind of attitude here in Massachusetts. We see it over and over again, and our duty
It
is
was
to
just
protect
criminal
people.
justice reform passed overwhelmingly by you and your
Right, and you
colleagues.
talk to law enforcement officers, and they do not favor that. The rank and file aren't really the ones who get to speak out about that. They do not favor that. It makes their job harder, and letting these criminals back on the street to re-victimize, to murder our law enforcement officers has got to stop, and this is the one way we can stop it.
Representative, thanks. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Justice, pleasure to see you.
I didn't get my last word in.
Well, you will next time. Is
All
that
right.
fair enough?
All right,
Good
fair
to see you,
enough.
Justice Cordy.